Hi, Chris here with MuseGrid, and we're going to build some more buttons. So let's take a look at these. I've called them inset buttons. Basically, they look like interface elements. They have this kind of carved out background. Let's look at them in preview here. So they have this kind of chiseled out carved background, carved into the background color here. And then they have this nice glowing hover effect. And these ones here even feel like they're slider buttons as well. So let's take these apart and see how they were built. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove some of these off the page here so that we don't get too distracted. Let's remove those ones, and we can remove these as well because they were just iterations of these here. Let's also lock this background down, so I'm going to select the background, right click and lock, and then we can move on these without worrying about this moving around. So we can see that these buttons are made up of a state button, and inside the state button we have a text frame that we're using the button, a familiar text frame button, and then we have another text frame button that we're using to create this this chiseled out background here. So let's take a look at the different parts and how we've actually created the look. So this chiseled background is just a dark grey color, so darker than the background color here, so that it feels like it's been cut out. And then we're using an effect on this, and we're actually using the bevel effect. But if you notice, we've dropped the opacity down and we've changed the angle to 300. Now what that will mean is that the lighter parts that would usually sit at the top of a button will now create this lighter part at the bottom. So we're imagining the light hitting the bottom of this carved out area, and we've got a distance of 2 and a blur of 2. So combined with that darker color there, it creates that slightly inset indented look. Now the button is pretty straightforward, so it's our familiar text frame button. We're using a gradient, the gradients that we've seen in other button videos as well. So we've got this light blue going to a darker blue that creates that kind of domed feel to it. But what we've also added to it is we've added some inner glow. Now if I just change this inner glow to, let's say, let's change it to white, and then let's put it up to 100%. You can see where the inner glow is actually residing, but by using a darker color, so if I just reset that back to where it was, you can see that although it's not completely obvious, it just adds to the feeling of this button being a kind of interface button, and it just adds some extra texture to the button feel. So when we hover over in our hover state, we're going to this this gradient color here, this pink going into orange. We could change it. Let's change it out for a green here, and you can see now that pink tint on just the edge there of the glow. So what we'll do there is we'll go into our glow and we'll change that to that lighter green, and now we've got that nice kind of glow feel to it. So with our state button, let's just set everything set to transparent. There's no hover states or anything, and we just pop those bits together. So we've got that dark blue, that heavier blue outline on the button to tell us that this is going to sit inside, and then we'll put this one inside here, and there we go, we have our button. So that's how we created the inset. Now with this one, we're using a familiar technique of using two parts to the button, so that we've got that line in between the two. This side is a text frame, this side is a text frame, but what we've done here is we've just changed the text for an icon font, but we've also increased the size. Now when you increase the size of the text, you also need to change some of the spacing. So if we bring our spacing panel on here, you'll see that with the 12 pixels, I think that is, let's have a look. Yes, the 12 pixel height, we're using a padding of 12 and 10 pixels top and bottom. But when we use we're using 19 pixel highs on this particular one, just seem to be the right dimensions. We're using an 8 and a 7, so we're reducing the amount of padding to take into account the resized text itself. So by putting those two slightly together, just like that, we get that nice little delineator line between the two. But because it's sitting in the state button, then when we hover over, when we move the mouse over the state button, it'll affect both items at once. So we can see that this side here, we've got that going to that green, and let's also make this fill here, the green hover as well. You could have two different colors if you wanted, you could have a flat button and a domed button if you wanted, or whatever you want. So let's have a preview of this now. Go to our preview, hit refresh, and we can see there that our button, that button now hovers nicely. So that's looking great. But what about this button here? Well, you probably noticed that this is actually including two buttons. So we've stretched out the inset at the back, and we've got two buttons. Now, on the first button is set to be 100% opacity, but then if we go into the hover state, you can see that we've dropped the opacity down to 1. Whereas on the other side, we've set the opacity to 1% on the normal state, and then 100% on the hover state. So when we move the mouse over, let's just hit preview. When we move the mouse over, you can see that it feels like the button is sliding across. So we create this kind of fake slider. Now the other buttons are just iterations of this by changing the radius corner on the buttons, but as you can see, we've just used no Photoshop here, and we get these really nice effects. Now if you wanted to, let's unlock this background color here. So I'm going to unlock this, right click on and unlock all on page. We should have, there we go. Now if I wanted to change this color, let's say for instance I put a dark blue. Now you can see that the inset now looks out of place. So what we'd want to do there is we'd want to change the fill color of that inset to match this blue. So if I choose that color there, and if I choose the blue, and then what we'll do is we'll just drop this down so it's a little bit more black to it, and now we get, if we preview this now, you can see that now feels more of it. So it's very easy to change this inset look by just changing that background color. The other thing that we could do, but we may lose some definition, is if we select that inset again, we go in there and select that. What I'll do now is I'll change it to black, but on the fill here, I'll just drop the opacity down. So let's say 52%, that'll do. So now I'm still getting the same kind of effect without changing the color, but I might lose a little bit of definition, but that's another way of doing the same thing. So you can see these inset interface buttons are actually pretty easy, and we've created them using the same techniques as all of the other buttons. So that's how to make inset buttons. Let's move on to our next set of buttons.